We're just going to get jumped right in. I was going to do a very short intro of Dr. Dunker here, but all I was going to say is on this first slide. So we are super happy to have him here. Today's conversation in general is really going to be about, just talking through ways to develop essential employability skills with learners of all ages, K through 12, that really endure, the ever-changing landscape of work, really preparing kids for the unpredictable, which is a fun game to be playing in the education space, and how we can also leverage business partnerships to create real-world learning opportunities, even if you are a teacher. So we'll be able to dig into some of those conversations, as well as, where you are in your position and responsibilities, you still have an opportunity to make some positive impacts on that front. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Eric and get us going.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Eric Dunker. I serve as an Associate Vice President and Dean for Arapahoe Community College, which is located in the South Metro region of Denver, Colorado, about 12,000 students. And over the past several years, we've really been honing in our partnerships with our K-12 partner, Douglas County School District. And there's 6 other school districts as well in Arapahoe County. And trying to create really a work-based learning continuum from K-12 to community college. And I wanted to share a tangible example for all of you today around apprenticeships in health. And oftentimes you're like, well, apprenticeships in health, that's really for 18 plus, right? But we're going to talk about our partnership with Centura. And don't worry, Jamie is not doing this presentation with me. Sometimes I tag team with her. But we just won a $2 million, it was called Sync Up Colorado, from the Ben Walton Foundation grant to create a sort of a health careers academy for ages like 14 to 18, to help them connect directly to health careers, and really focusing on those 21st century employability skills, and then layering on industry partner, competency-based education, industry recognized credentials, immersive job shadows. So we're going to talk a little bit about how that came to be and what our vision is. And then we're also going to talk about our actual apprenticeship with Centura Health, and how we've served a very diverse audience to go from zero health experience to fully employed medical assistants within 6 months. So we'll just go. But I always like to start with a story. So Joe, and I know Joe is a working adult, but you got to think like, he was one of your students earlier on, right? Joe has always wanted to be in healthcare since this at an early age, but he said, well, I wanted to make money a little quicker, right? Sometimes in healthcare, you become frontline, so $15 to $18 an hour as a medical assistant or a certified nursing assistant. And sometimes the health ecosystem hasn't done a good job of saying, okay, you want to go from an MA or a CNA to a nurse. Here's what the pathway is going to look like, and here's how we're going to support you. Oftentimes you're on your own, so then they stop out, have to go full time, they take on debt. So it can be a very sometimes intimidating field because people think about doctor or nurse, right? But I think if Joe would tell you this earlier on, it would have been helpful to talk about the almost 90 health professions around medical assistant, certified nursing assistant, radiologist, tech, where you can get your foot in the door and then eventually work your way up, so it doesn't feel so insurmountable, right? So what Joe did was, like a lot of us, he went to college. He kind of took some jobs here and there, then got into sales. He did sales for like 20 years. Eventually, he was the single dad with twin girls in high school. And then he got laid off, unfortunately. And that was like in 2018, right before the pandemic. And he didn't know what to do. And he had to provide for his 2 girls and his family. So he, the traditional way to get back into the game for education is, to go through a classroom-based program, get a certification somehow, and then find your way back to employability. He didn't have that luxury. So we co-created this apprenticeship program, leveraging, yes, he came in with some 21st century employability skills, which we did assess. We helped Centura identify people who with no prior medical experience, but had some 21st century workplace skills, and then basically layered on. We reverse engineered a medical assistant classroom-based program, which typically takes like a year and a half to get through, and we did it within. We basically did it within 6 months. So basically, you can start as a medical assistant apprentice from day one, get paid 32 hours a week, and then be mentored by the lead MA, learn some 21st century healthcare skills on the job, and sorry, you hear some kids in the background. And then eventually, learn those skills for medical assisting. We did online education. We did a lot of job shadows. And hold on one second, guys. Hold on. All right. So, anyways, sorry, you know how that goes. So then eventually. So he could take that medical assistant curriculum that would have taken a year and a half. He gets it done in 6 months. You pair on the job learning, 21st century employability skills, mentorship. He passes the national certification within 6 months. So now he's a full MA and is now working in healthcare, being able to provide a living for his family. And so we've now served over 100 students like Joe, both youth, young adults, and older adults into this program. And so Centura Health is the largest health employer in Colorado. They have 21,000 employees, and they had some deep deficits in their entry-level talent pipeline. And so what they're finding is, how do we lean in more to this talent pipeline? What happened to someone like Joe who really wanted to go into health, but was kind of discouraged from going into it because our systems can be kind of entrenched? So just wanted to paint that picture for you for Joe. So now Joe is one of the top medical assistants in the Centura Health system 3 years later, and he's studying to become a nurse, and he has not had to stop out. So we've layered on programming for him to upskill and to become a nurse. And so then, if we think he graduates next year, he'll be making $75,000 or $80,000 a year. And that's a good story, and him with no debt because of the apprenticeship program that layers on 21st century workplace skills, job shadowing, industry partnerships. So, and we're going to explain a little bit how we got there, and then kind of what this means for K-12. All right, so many of you have probably seen this. This helps me, kind of puts work-based learning into the simplest terms. Most of our school systems do an okay job about learning about work, right? Career days, introduction to health, or introduction to careers. But the hard part is learning through work and learning at work, right? Learning through work can be job shadows and, maybe unpaid internships. And then learning at work is really your apprenticeship, paid internships that are really intentionally built. Our systems don't incentivize sometimes the way we're funded to actually do the through work and at work. And so it's almost like it becomes this optional experience for sometimes the top performing students. But what we know is your underserved students that require, that probably didn't have access to that social capital growing up, are going to be more benefited by learning through work and learning at work. So what we've done with the Douglas County School District, for example, is we now share employer partners. So one thing about partnerships and learning through work and learning at work is when your talent ecosystem, which is K-12, community college, 4-year, workforce centers, are all approaching employer partners in silos, your best employers are going to get fatigued, right? So what we did is we created a coalition called Talent Pipeline Douglas County. And, we're kind of the convener, but all of the ecosystem partners that help with training kind of get together. We actually open our books in terms of who are we talking with, what kind of opportunities does, for the K-12 situation in aerospace, healthcare, finance, you name it, what kind of internships, job shadows, the learning through work and learning at work do they have access to? And how can we help leverage some clinical relationships, say in healthcare, to help incentivize some of these companies to lean in more to the K-12 district, because we know you can teach about 21st century work skills all you want, right? And we have great teachers that do it. But there's this research out of Switzerland who does, I think 65% of the whole population goes through apprenticeships there, that 11 out of, it was 11 out of 12 most important soft skills, so teamwork, critical thinking, problem solving, showing up on time, are actually kind of best learned on the job, right? You can hone that in the classroom, but they have to practice it. So I think the challenge to our systems are, what are we doing about learning through work and learning at work? And that's really helped us, I would say, galvanize our current talent pipeline ecosystem. We identify gaps. Like sometimes even the K-12 partner may have a stronger employer relationship in one area than we do, and then vice versa. By sharing those employer partnerships and looking at it like a talent pipeline development strategy, the employer is going to be more interested in working with the ecosystem, because it's not about charity for them anymore. They, with the Great Resignation, and it's harder and harder to find good talent, they can see the both short-term and long-term benefits by leaning into your system now. So just wanted to really get that across, that those employer partnerships are everything when it comes to learning through work and learning at work. And we just find the more collaborative way to approach them is going to be better. Because again, we believe our students, whether you're K-12 or community college or four-year, if you can get that on-the-job experience through an immersive job, shadow, internship, pre-apprenticeship, or apprenticeship, before you get your degree or as you're getting your degree, you're going to be much more equipped to then enter the post-degree world of work, whatever that may mean to you. So many of you are probably familiar with an apprenticeship model. Just want to briefly go over this. So I like to say it's not your grandfather or grandmother's apprenticeship program where you're learning one skill for one trade and you're married to that trade the rest of your life. The whole goal is the education ecosystem helps layer on that related instruction, 21st century broad workplace skills, the theory behind it, your math, communication, reading, some of the hard skills, but then you take into account what are they going to be learning on the job. And you kind of, you create a competency map, understanding what they're going to be learning on the job and through mentorship and doing, plus related instruction. And then the whole point of an apprenticeship is you're actually getting paid too. That's what differentiates an apprenticeship from maybe an internship or a pre-apprenticeship. An apprenticeship has to be at least a one-year experience where you're getting paid. And then hopefully there's a job while you're completing your apprenticeship. And then a pre-apprenticeship or internship or job shadow, you can be unpaid, but providing immersive experience. So what we try to do is create as many, we're trying to create as many apprenticeships as possible for our students. We have some as young as 16, 17 getting into these now. But again, what the K-12 system can do is layering on job shadow, pre-apprenticeship, internship before that. And I'll explain how we're doing this with Sync Up. So it can be a blend of non-credit, credit, industry recognized credentials. So it's the ecosystem's responsibility to help stack this in and make it make sense for students. Because right now, oftentimes, if you needed an industry recognized credential and a degree in a certain pathway, sometimes it's on the student to figure out how to get that industry recognized credential. And then the ecosystem provides that education credit-based degree. What you do is help put the puzzle piece together for the student, right? And you help sequence that out. And the whole goal is, yes, we want you to do an apprenticeship. That doesn't mean you have to do that the rest of your life, but you're going to be learning valuable 21st century skills that are going to be transferable no matter what you do, right? But from the employer standpoint, especially many of them who have a 50% or more turnover for entry-level employees right now during the Great Resignation, would rather keep you for 2 or 3 years, train you on the job, and then, you're doing some productive labor, and then either upskill as you want to move up and get more degrees, or if you leave, at least you've left a good impact on that company. So I don't think we've ever seen this kind of turnover before on the front lines. And so that's why we believe more employers are interested in talking about apprenticeships and work-based learning. So we've done other apprenticeships in other areas, but we're just using this one in health, for example. So right now, 3 years after Joe was in the first cohort, we've served 126 paid apprentices. They have Centura had about a 60% year over year retention rate with the MAs that they recruited before. And what wasn't happening is an intentional process of layering on 21st century workplace skills, layering on the hard skills and putting it as a total package. So going through this program now, we've had over half have been students of color, almost reduced equity gaps to zero. It's almost basically an equitable graduation rate with our white students and our students of color. Almost an 87% retention rate. So this is where your employer is going to keep leaning in. Their 87% retention rate compared to a 60% maybe retention rate has greatly benefited their bottom line. And so, yeah, sometimes an apprenticeship or work-based learning program can be a little bit more investment from an industry up front. The whole goal is if we can get you to these results, you're hopefully going to work more with our ecosystem. So let me give you a really good example of how we did this at high school. So we then created with Centura Health, Intro to Health Careers class that used to be 16 weeks in the classroom. We shifted that to 1 week in the classroom, 1 week doing an immersive job shadow in one of the 8 fast-growing health professions. So by the end of the semester, every single student did 8 2-hour job shadows in medical assistant, nursing, certified nursing assistant, sterile processing, surgical technology, and had a much better idea of what the front of the house, back of the house, areas where you're seeing blood, areas where it's not as patient facing, and they got to understand, hey, this is what I like to do, this is what I don't like to do. That then prepares them, say, hey, do I even want to stay in health? So Centura would not have done that if we didn't have this kind of success on the apprenticeship front. So really quick again, Centura has 21,000 employees in all of Colorado and Western Kansas. They have a lot of good partnerships, but I think they finally found one with us. What we do is we don't just partner with Centura just in our local jurisdiction. What Centura wanted was, hey, this is working so well, let's scale this throughout Colorado and Western Kansas. But how do we do this where your other partners can kind of use the model that we've created? And that has challenged some traditional, what you would call service area boundaries or the local ways of doing things. But Centura wanted a scaled model. So we actually now are scaling this statewide. And with we've also taken on Health One, which is a subsidiary of HCA based in Nashville. They're probably one of the largest healthcare organizations in the country. So what this is it's a 1-year apprenticeship, right? Because an apprenticeship has to be 1 year, but they really get everything they need in that first 26 weeks. They work from day one. They get paid as a medical assistant apprentice. Almost by month 3 or 4, they're like doing real medical assistant work under the supervision of one. And then in month 6, they pass their national certification. I think we have a 93% pass rate for the first time. And these people had 0 prior medical experience. And what Centura has been blown away with is the skill sets that they're creating, not just the medical assistant skills, but the 21st century soft skills. They're learning the Centura way. They're learning the cultures of these clinics. And so what Centura is seeing is, we love the way the apprenticeship, the culture that this program is creating. So let's create more MA apprenticeships and then redoing some traditional FTE, which is full-time equivalent for MAs that they were hiring somewhere else. And let's create apprenticeship positions in every clinic. So that's kind of the culture shift that we're seeing across healthcare right now. And again, in other areas, aerospace, you can do it in technology and finance, but what makes the difference is it's a really good way for them to, one, kind of see how you are in a real setting as an apprentice, but again, those 21st century skills are huge. Let's see. So just so you guys know, we actually scaled this model. We actually kind of franchised this now to Ohio. So Cincinnati State is using this. with Mercy Health Systems. Any Ohio folks, it's one of the largest organizations in Ohio. They're on the third cohort now. It's been really fruitful for them. And I think they're partnering with their local high school now. We've leveraged, so these can be expensive to get off the ground. And I'll open this up for questions in a second, but what's really nice is, so Centura just gave us a $500,000 gift. It'll press release come out any day now. That's matched by another donor to create a $1 million innovation fund for us now to reinvest in more healthcare apprenticeship programs. So now we're going to be investing in medical lab technology, sterile processing, pharmacy technician, and likely will be nursing down the road. We were able to get a $9 million grant because of this work from the Department of Labor to assist other colleges that want to onboard more apprenticeships. And then again, we just won a $2 million Sync Up Colorado Challenge with the Ben Walton Foundation to specifically work with 14 to 18-year-olds to create a summer health careers academy. So we're not going to try to get in the business of what you guys are doing during the school year, and we're going to pay them $500 over 6 weeks, part-time. And each of them are going to go to like an intro to health careers, assess their existing 21st century skills, self-reflect on what they need to know and be able to do to be successful in a setting. Over 3 weeks, then they're going to be doing every single module in the fastest growing health professions. And then those last 2 weeks, they're going to be going through 2 very immersive job shadows of their choice. And then by the the final exam, we'll just be presenting on what you've learned, both hard skills, soft skills. And the nicest part is we're going to create a warm handoff to those HR departments. So by the time they graduate high school, they're going to have a job if they want it in healthcare. We're going to create a badge for them, and actually they can have it starting their junior year of high school. But the whole goal is everything they've done prior to that is leading up to this warm handoff. So now they can work when they're 17 or 18, and then if they want continuing education to be a nurse, they can get unleash those tuition benefit opportunities with that healthcare partner and be gainfully employed. So essentially, in a nutshell, we believe 21st century skills are best mastered. We're still always mastering them, right? A combination of classroom and on the job as much as you can. With modern technology and more people being used to remote environments through COVID, you can create really cool job shadows virtually online, so long as you have a deep employer partnership. And then ideally you can create modules where students are practicing both some of the hard skills and then some of those soft skills. Like for instance, if you're a medical assistant, customer service is one of the most important things you can master. So practicing those customer interaction skills, problem solving if a patient is concerned about a medical diagnosis that you're not quite trained on yet, and how to put that into the computer, and then how to talk to the doctor about that situation. So we feel good. I mean, we learn every day for how we're doing this, but why we partner with Thrively is we appreciate that Thrively really does a good job of creating assessments for students about strengths and like where they feel they have strengths, and then really those employer partners to kind of try before you buy to a certain extent to really explore the world of work. The average student now I think transfers 3 or 4 times before they get their degree, which is normal. But I think our ecosystem needs to make sure that are we providing them, our students, with as much real world experience that we can control, as opposed to just kind of making everything optional and aside to the curriculum as opposed to ingrained in the curriculum. So I think that's our biggest lesson learned. I'll leave you with one more thing. So how this has worked on IT, instead of now creating doing a CIS, computer information systems, 210 class, and then saying optionally you can take this CompTIA industry certification at the end. We now embed that in the class as a final exam to make sure that industry exam is embedded in the curriculum as opposed to being optional. And then obviously more students then will and they know when they sign up for the course, that's the deal. So how do you ingrain that in the curriculum as opposed to making it as, you know, optional and kind of a side deal like we normally do? So I'll leave it there. That was a mouthful. Happy to take questions, and Paul, however you want to take it from here, man.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Feel free to stop sharing your screen and we can kind of get that gallery view going here. Folks, Valerie, I see you have this question about what tool are you using to assess their 21st century skills. Eric, I know you kind of started touching in a little bit about, you know, integrating some of these, you know, final exams with the kind of industry standard things that that are required to get those certifications. More broadly speaking, I think this question is pointing that, you know, looking beyond the way we're used to evaluating kids in conventional schooling environments, doesn't really touch on these, you know, the 11 out of 12 that you mentioned, right? These quote unquote soft skills, which is obviously becoming more and more of an ironic term these days. But in these programs you set up, how are kids being able to showcase the growth in these areas?
Hey, so basically a variety of ways, right? So one thing we do during our info sessions for these apprenticeship programs is we talk about, hey, here's some, you know, for an apprenticeship, some prerequisite 21st century skills our employers looking for. And so we do pre-screening interviews to see, hey, what's your background like? And again, this is more for the adult apprentices. What we do for the pre-apprenticeships and the job shadows and how we assess 21st century skills is we create prompts for them. So during our the modules that we create, you know, in any learning management system, we use Canvas and Desire to Learn. As they're going through what's a medical assistant, what do they do? We create prompts for them to then do problem solving, you know, teamwork. We make sure all those soft skills are touched upon, you know, in the scope of the work, right? And then in terms of, you know, showing up on time, which is like sometimes the simplest soft skill to talk about, but it's a thing, right? You know, for students when they haven't been used to that. So that's where anytime you have an in-person, you know, job shadow experience or internship experience, making sure that they're practicing that, dressing professionally, you know, professionalism in the workplace. And then we actually train the mentors as well. So we have a preceptor and mentor training as well to make sure as you're talking with your students about the world of work, make sure you challenge them and prompt them on these like say 12 soft skills, right? And we have a mentorship checklist. So as you're going through the program, it depends how immersive it is. It can be, the apprenticeship is a little more detailed than say a pre-apprenticeship or job shadow, but we try to embed that somebody's checking off that they've proven to a certain degree that they've demonstrated teamwork skills, problem solving, critical thinking, strong, you know, written communication, strong verbal communication, an acumen for customer service. So I hope that, I mean, it's that's kind of how we do it. We embed it in the curriculum, but we're intentional about making sure that any prompts you have about a situation going on in nursing, medical assistant, sterile processing, we're going to have them practice the hard skill in the scope of using one of those soft skills. And our instructors and the preceptors on the site are trained in that.
Yeah, thank you. You went a lot of different and in-depth directions there. I really appreciate that. One of the questions I just got from Terry is, I think one that was going to be a natural one today is like, how do we even begin forming these connections? I think this conversation in particular is interesting for me because over the 5 or 6 years I've spoken to folks in this type of work, it's always been strictly K-12 to business with no kind of intermediary. And I really see you guys as this intermediary. So if you could speak to both of those, like whether or not you have that connection.
Here's what I cannot stress this enough. There's a limited basis in which K-12 can partner with the business, right? Because these students are relatively full-time with you. The business has to see the short-term and long-term picture of the return on investment that's going to be created by them leaning into your district. And that's why I feel like if you could share employer partners with your community college partner and or four-year partner, because they want there's many ways to partner, right? There's your internship, job shadow. Look, when you're 16 years old, you're not going to be doing a ton of productive labor for that employer. And so, yes, it's like nice for them to do that. It's the right thing to do, but they're likely not going to do that at scale. But if you eventually map out a continuum of, if you do this for your 14 to 18 year olds, and even in middle school, that's where even the learning at work comes into play. Can they show up to these job shadows? You know, or can they show up to these career days and then, you know, take a field trip to your company? And then in high school, you're going to be doing internships, job shadows. And I'd almost challenge the community. If you want homegrown talent, if you want to retain your own, which is your best asset, you have got to be doing these things. And then for your community college, then yes, then you're going to start getting actual apprentices. You're going to be getting frontline labor, who eventually will grow, you know, into the organization. So the best way to do that is starting, you know, when they're younger. And again, if they're just doing it when they're younger, I've seen fatigue from employers, and I think that they see the whole pipeline, they're going to be more likely to partner with you. And if you have a strong intermediary like a chamber of commerce helping to direct that traffic, then I think that can be a better way too.
Yeah, I think I like that chamber of commerce piece. I think that's a place that people often don't think about. And I've seen examples. There's one example in particular in North Carolina where business, chamber of commerce, and education have formed just an absolutely incredible network. And it's really cool to see. Crystal has a great question, and I love it because educators always bring in the what about, like, how do you navigate this stuff when it's minors? So she's asking about navigating HIPAA compliance. What does that look like in this health specific example?
Yeah, I can tell you. So, you know, it depends on the state. In Colorado, you can be 16 years old and be licensed to be a certified nursing assistant. But a lot of hospitals and healthcare organizations kind of limit contact until you're 18. But what I would say is, I would say more and more are becoming flexible when it comes to doing job shadows. I mean, we did this job shadows for 14 to 18-year-olds at the actual hospital and clinic in the district. Their legal team worked with the hospital legal team. Yeah, you have to have a progressive legal team in order to do this. But again, and I hate to say this, but it's true. Like, how is the current talent pipeline strategy for healthcare isn't working, and they have got to figure out a way to grow their own, right? And that has to start when they're younger. So anyone that like a Joe who was interested in healthcare but just fell off, or it just, you know, they didn't have that network. How do you prevent that from happening, right? And so this is why for the Sync Up Challenge, we're going to be doing immersive virtual job shadows that students have to kind of prove that they're really interested. They have to pass these modules, interact in this Health Careers Academy. And then after that, they're going to get a badge. And then that healthcare employer is going to be more likely to take you on, you know, as an employee. So for instance, you can work in nutrition services, janitorial services, oftentimes when you're 16 at a healthcare organization specifically. So our whole goal is that even if they have positions that there's an 18-year-old limit, you can still get your foot in the door oftentimes by the time you're 16. But for those other experiences like job shadow internships, you're going to have to just develop. That's where you have to develop that really deep relationship, and having an industry-led intermediary like a chamber of commerce or like an economic development corporation, to us is the best way to do that. Oftentimes we're pulling the strings behind the scenes, but what they need to see is that their community's economic development people are the ones driving this. But it's tricky. And again, in finance and aerospace, you can talk about a lot of other areas where you could replicate this model. I just chose to highlight healthcare because we're doing the most in healthcare right now, but we do this in water operations, we do this in property management, community association management. But yeah, healthcare can be the trickiest part in terms of being on site when you're a minor. I totally get that, but there are ways through it, and it's where you just have to really have that honest conversation about how you can help them with their short and long term talent pipeline.
Yeah, I think you've spoken a lot about, some of these universal qualities of what makes this stick when you're first forming the partnership. As you talk about the different industries you've kind of stepped into, aerospace, tech, what have you, what have been some of the surprises of, oh, this is always a unique challenge, no matter where we're starting, and it doesn't just like work as a copy paste solution across the board?
Oh, I would say those industries that don't have essentially shared competencies. So, for instance, in technology, I can work with two different tech companies for a software developer, and they'll have two completely different ways how they want to train their people. Versus in healthcare, sometimes it's just a little more. There's more standardization, and so I would say it can be tricky to get scale when you're working with a multi-employer collaborative in areas like technology, because there are some industry recognized credentials, but the cultures are so different. And again, what's tricky about tech is every company is a tech firm. Your K-12 districts, none of us would operate without it. So many big companies who are not tech firms have a huge tech department, right? Think of Western Union. Western Union's a money exchange bank service, but the reality is they're pretty much a tech firm, right? Their headquarters is in Denver. It's right in our backyard. So we work with them on software developers, and Western Union has a very different culture on how they train up software developers than, say, a Lockheed Martin does. And that can just be tricky, because sometimes in order for it to make sense for your K-12 or community college, there needs to be a little standardization. So what we're trying to work on is creating some communities of work-based learning. So there's this group in Colorado called Colorado Succeeds. It's a K-12 advocacy organization that's really funded by the private sector. And they've created these really innovative work-based learning communities where your Lockheeds and your Western Unions are getting together and talking about their outcomes are the same, but how to get there are so different. And then how do we collaborate better so us, the education organization, can actually create some scale with them without customizing every single student that goes through. I mean, I think that's the hard part. Honestly, the reason why healthcare is still challenging, but it's a little easier to get scale because there's just more standardization. So I would say standardization sometimes is the biggest challenge.
It's ironic. I don't even know if there's a question here, but just more of a comment back, because we know how much standardization has created problems of inequity and things of that nature within the K through 12 system, right? And it's obviously advantageous when trying to go to the industry side. And I think what's interesting is if you do get that good example, right? Like you have this great partnership with Centura, it's resulted in these different grants, so like millions of dollars. Sometimes it might be the right approach of, look for spread versus scale. Like as long as you're providing the opportunities that the kids are interested in, I think that's interesting and a great example of, not every story is going to be the same depending on who you're partnering with. So that's super helpful. Lorraine, I am not quite clear on your question. If you're willing to unmute, feel free. I'm not sure if you're asking Eric directly if they're offering online internships or if you're yeah, okay.
Paul, thank you. And excuse the not camera. I've been on camera and on Zoom all day.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah, I finally had to get I'm looking so tired. I just thought, but anyway, so I work for I run a transition partnership program for high school students with disabilities. Everything you're saying is helping me already. You opened my mind. But I was trying to find ways to create work experiences, online internships during the COVID period of us, for the last year and a half. And some people have been successful, others not. But having a student who used to, like, if I had them placed at Mission Valley Vet Clinic, they'd go in there, they're 8 hours a week, and we'd have job duties lined up and this and that. So I'm trying to find interesting ways that I could make it a win-win for an employer to have one of our students working after school, but via online. So you were mentioning like customer service, and I'm like, no, they're not going to be really able to interact with customers via Zoom. I guess I'm just trying to open my mind to ideas for online internships.
Yeah, so that's where I think, I mean, again, that it depends on the business, right? It's got to be business led. But what I would say is, at least for customer service and practicing those things, that's where, to me, the interactive job shadows can be created. So there's a lot of grants out there. I would bet you most of your states have earmarked some of their ARPA dollars, which is the American Rescue Plan Act dollars, for workforce development, right? Broadly. I can tell you Colorado did about $100 million. I know Tennessee's done. Florida just announced they did like $200 million. And they're creating mini grants for K-12 and community college and workforce centers to create, within 2 years, a product that can assist students with these skills, right? Or to help industry eventually with their talent pipeline conundrum. And that's kind of in the spirit of what we're doing with Sync Up Colorado, is we're creating these virtual job shadows for 14 to 18-year-olds that, yes, it's not an actual internship yet, but they're practicing these skills. They're getting a much better idea of the world of work with DaVita, Health One, and Centura. And then that's where we create those warm handoffs. And then what I would argue is Centura, DaVita, and Health One are so big, they're going to have jobs that you can probably do remotely, like medical coding and billing is a good example. You may not be interacting with them face to face, but you're on the phone and you're doing data entry. But the reason why they're getting those jobs is because they had those experiences before that and they were to practice those skills. So that's what I mean. Again, it's about the business need, right? Who needs people who can work remotely, or now that hopefully we're starting to come out of the pandemic and we're learning to live within the pandemic a little bit more, of so many companies are struggling with entry-level talent. If you know that you're going to have your student for 2 years, right, and you can help provide some structure for an internship, and almost guarantee they'll probably, as long as they treat them well, they'll be there for 2 years. That employer, to me, will take that deal over the current reality, which is over 50% turnover year over year. Every time you turn over an employee, it costs like $20,000. And you would, to me, you flip that and say, hey, we have this awesome program with these very willing students who, yeah, maybe need a little guidance, but we're going to have these students for the next 2 years. Can they work with your employer consortium or with your, maybe 10 hours a week, 15 hours a week? And as long as, yes, a little bit of internship, but they'll be doing some productive labor and sometimes taking over what an entry-level person would be doing. That to me, that's going to feel like a good value proposition for your industry partner. And I strongly recommend, if your education organization is not already a member of your local chamber of commerce, to become one, because those people can really help facilitate those relationships. I leverage my membership all the time. And I challenge our CEO of our chamber to help me make these employer connections. And she does a great job of doing that. So to me, those are a couple examples. And they know those businesses that are calling the chamber and saying, I can't find entry-level talent right now. And to me, your organization, Lorraine, could say, guess what? I have people willing to work, but here's how we're going to meet in the middle or something. I don't know. That's how I roll, but hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah,
Thank you
awesome.
so much. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Lorraine.
It's a great question. It's a great question.
I knew I wasn't interpreting it correctly, so I'm glad we brought you on. So Terry had messaged as well, and I think the first question provided some of the answer here. Just like they were just wondering, can we reach out directly to Centura Health? Like, is that like how you would potentially start this conversation, or is there some different steps you might take, Eric, first?
I think the best way to do it is, I know this sounds like a little sketchy, but go find them at an event, right? So it could be a chamber event, it could be a community event, that you'll just kind of know they're going to be there, or maybe it's their own community event, and then make a warm introduction. I think if they meet you, whether it's on Zoom or in person, that is that's so much better than a cold call. So, and somebody that knows them, that's where, again, I keep going back to your chamber. If you're a member of the chamber and they're a member of the chamber and there's like this workforce group, you can call their chamber rep and say, hey, you know, I was talking to Sherry from the Castle Rock chamber, and she said you're struggling with, entry level people in nutrition services or janitorial services or CNAs. Our school would love to partner with you, and would love to meet you. I usually go where they're at, so I can see their employer environment. But to me, that's how I would approach it. So I always try to find them at an event, or find someone that knows them. And then typically there's two things, right? You have your subject matter experts in the field, like your chief of nursing, but then you have your HR department, right? What I've found is when you can get a relationship with both of them, you need both. You need buy-in from the HR department. It's always going to go to them eventually for any talent pipeline strategy, even internships, and you need your subject matter expert. So for instance, in cybersecurity, if you're looking to create a relationship and you know the chief cybersecurity person, they may say they want something and they have a need, but I always find the HR department has a sign off on it. So when you can find champions in both areas, both subject matter expert and HR, that's what's going to create your win. And these relationships take a long time. I would give yourself, from the first time you meet this person, it could take 6 months to a year to get anything off the ground. But the idea is you're building momentum and you're building that relationship. So there's no playbook per se, but I would say the most effective playbook that I have is find a warm, sort of a warm introduction before you make an ask.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Eric. And the second question, Terry, your second question about kind of just a general list of businesses that have apprenticeships already set up where you might be able to find that. I think this Chamber of Commerce conversation is a big one. And I'll get some stuff from Eric as well after this call to see if there's any.
And I can tell you, whatever state you're in, you're going to have a statewide Department of Labor rep. So your statewide Department of Labor rep will have a list of all apprenticeships that are located in your state. But the hard part is, how do you find pre-apprenticeships, internships, job shadows? Those are typically scattered and not organized. And so that's where I think it's important to, if you can, come together as an ecosystem. So your K-12, community college, if you have a four-year partner, and your workforce center. Those are your four key talent development entities in any community. And sometimes a four-year partner is relevant and sometimes they're not, especially if you're in a rural community, you don't have a four-year, physically close to you within 100 miles or something. And then that's where you just open those conversations. Okay. Look at your labor market. Okay. Let's say advanced manufacturing is more prevalent in your labor market than say, finance. Okay. In advanced manufacturing, who are the top employers? What seems to be the most prevalent workforce need? And that's where I think you start having those conversations around how can the ecosystem better lean in to the business needs, and vice versa. How can that business lean into you? I think you guys probably are, I'm preaching to the choir, but I think for years, the American business has been more consumers of the talent that our systems develop as opposed to co-producers, right? The whole deal with an apprenticeship is we're co-pilots. We both give up a little control in order to layer on, the actual business skills and workplace skills, and those 21st century global skills that, I think we do a decent job of, but you marry them together. And when a business looks at it like that, to me, they're more interested in partnering with you. And then again, it's all about what's in it for them in the long term, right? And the whole deal is, I live in Colorado. I guess Paul, you do too. We're in a state where that's migrated talent. We have the second highest rate of bachelor's degree people living in Colorado in the country. Yet we rank 47th with graduating our own. And what's happened is with higher home prices, migration rates going down, right? So then what happens is employers now have to look to their locally homegrown talent. And when you don't have those systems developed, they're going to struggle. One of the best examples, I don't know if there's anyone from South Dakota on here. Forgot they make all the flat screen, huge flat screens that you see at like an arena or a football stadium. They're actually headquartered in South Dakota. I forgot what the company's called. Anyways, they have one of the best examples. Like, I love South Dakota, but most people are not migrating there. Like, hey, I'm going to go live in South Dakota after getting my bachelor's degree somewhere else, right? I'm just saying, like, their migration rate is not very high. So their ecosystem there has done a good job of creating internships with South Dakota State, the high schools, and I think 60% of their employees started as an intern or something like that. They're a publicly traded company. I forgot what their name was, but that's an example of like they were kind of forced to do it because they couldn't rely on that migration rate. And so business and education really came together and figured out how can that ecosystem create homegrown talent and keep talent there. I think other states are going to have to really look at that. And that's, we kind of try to use that as leverage in Colorado because it's real now. I mean, so you can be a traveling nurse and almost get paid $180,000 now, I think, in Colorado. Every 6 weeks you move around because there's not enough nurses here. That it's nice for the individual, but for the company that's trying to create sustainable employment, it's a nightmare.
Yeah, that's a great example, Eric. You see it too with smaller organizations or companies that have to, if you're paying for outside consulting help, it's always more than having someone that's on full time. This brings up an interesting question for me too. Urban, rural, I think the question is relevant regardless of transportation. What does the transportation question look like for these opportunities?
Yeah, so I would say a lot of times with the job shadows, if it's in person, hopefully that company will sponsor transportation for those job shadow experiences. We had a grant that helped reimburse some mileage. I find grants from lots of interesting places. That's where I still believe what's forced, with COVID, what forced us is how much can we do online, right? Like, so we're going to create the Summer Health Careers Academy. We're only going to have you meet one time in person. And there's some public transportation options. And then everything else you can be doing online 3 days a week through, virtual job shadows. We're going to hire 2 navigators that are going to be kind of intrusive with the students to make sure they're on track. And we're going to track to make sure people are meeting their mile markers. So that's where it's like kind of meeting in the middle. It's like, can you do some things online that's very immersive so you can solve for a little bit of the transportation issue? You got to solve for access, right? So making sure the district or the workforce system is someone has a laptop if they don't already have one, and internet access, which in some rural areas I fully understand that can be an issue. But then kind of putting the onus on the business as well. So what can they do to lean into to the transportation situation? Every ecosystem is different, right? So like in Denver, we have a light rail system, we have an RTD bus system, we have buses, vans, but in a rural area where maybe you need to drive 30 miles to go to this said clinic, I would say that's where your ecosystem has to just create a localized solution. I'll just leave it at that. It's hard. I don't want to talk in too many generalities because every situation is different, but at least that you're talking about it. Like, okay, access to internet broadband technology, right? Access to transportation, access to that employer. And then how do you make a student earn it? That's the tricky part, right? They're not so sometimes someone who wants to do an apprenticeship, they don't get hired, gets mad at us because like, well, you guaranteed me employment. I'm like, actually, no. You have to kind of earn that. We're going to help you get there, but I can't do the interview for you. Most people are successful, but that's where, again, hone in on those 21st century skills, create those milestones for students so they feel like there's some progression.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
And sorry, last thing is you don't want to let down your employer partners by not providing them people who are not ready per se, but at least have somewhat of an idea that what's expected of them, professionalism, customer service. I mean, that's that slippery slope of you gotta make sure you're getting some wins for your employers, or they'll quickly stop partnering with you.
Yeah, that's such a huge point. One of the bigger kind of internship based type of models out there is big picture learning. And one of the great things they have is, a month in, a learner might be ready to just be off and running. Like they're just there, they could go. And there's some learners that'll take 9 to 12 months, and they set a culture up where there's no judgment. Like it doesn't, like there's no good or bad about it. It's where you are. And once you are able to take that leap and actually go into the actual work environment, you just explode. It's that confidence building, that trust building.
Before I forget, so what's really important, what's helped us retain and provide interventions when needed is, and I funded this a lot through grants, and I think there's grants available for your organization too, is, and our high school is doing this now, is creating work-based learning program managers. So for every X amount of internships, apprenticeships, or job shadows, we have a work-based learning program manager, and they're responsible for, they're the intermediary between the student, the employee, K-12 or community college. They control the FERPA waivers, or HIPAA waivers, whatever you need. And they kind of help track. So yes, on the job, the student has a mentor. At the school, the student has a teacher, right? But what's nice is that you have somebody, it's like a hospitalist or a navigator. You have somebody that kind of is responsible for the whole situation. And we give them a number of students, right? And employers that they're responsible for. And those interventions, when someone didn't show up for the job and they didn't call, instead of being fired, they know, okay, this is our apprentice. They're an apprentice for a reason. Let's go intervene with them. Let's go figure out what's going on. So we give them a call, we show up in person. We do everything. Like your system needs to make sure, if you're going to do this, you have the infrastructure to make sure you do everything possible to help the student be successful, learn when they mess up. And then at some point, it happens again and again and again. It's time to maybe have a different conversation. But what's different about this model is, behind the scenes, there's a much more support than say an entry-level employee would have. That's what's so different, and what it can lead to either success or a failed model if you don't account for that.
I think that was a great place for us to wrap things up here as we get to the top of the hour, Eric. Thank you so much. You came with so many great, really practical tips. No,
the kids are like running around. It's like, it's fine. Like, I love them. It's just, I was like, guys, come on. Like, go outside.
It's okay. You are not the first, and you will not be the last.
I know. What are you gonna do?
It's kind of been nice to have the more home environments in these types of conversations, because
like,
makes it real. Well, but yeah, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending. My parting thought is always, if you would like a certificate for attendance for professional development purposes, please email me directly. I'm going to drop my email in the chat, and we will send the recording and some other resources out. Eric, are you good with sharing this small set of slides with us?
Yeah, totally.
Cool. So we'll share the slides too with you all tomorrow. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email about really anything. And we'll hopefully see you all on a future webinar. Thank you so much.